Well, welcome to another edition of Intentional Conversations. On Intentional Conversations, we seek to interview leaders in men's ministry to help men grow spiritually and help leaders and pastors to reach men in today's culture, discussing issues men face every day. It is a program where a men's ministry leader interviews leaders in men's ministry. Hey, man, this is Mike Sallin of Cape Fear Men. If you have listened to this podcast for any length, you know I like to have men on that are making an impact in today's culture of reaching men. And not a particular group of men either, but a men of all generations. And you know, the topic I like to discuss with my guests more than any other is about discipleship, the importance of men being in a discipling relationship. Today, I'm honored to have on the program Todd Unzinker. Todd is the Executive Director and Treasurer of the Baptist State Convention of North Carolina. Welcome, Todd. I appreciate you being with me today.
Thanks so much, buddy. I'm so glad to be here. It's an honor.
Great. Now, let me share a little bit about your bio so our listeners to know who you are and where you're coming from. But Todd has a passion for the local churches and the Great Commission. Todd's vision for the Baptist State Convention of North Carolina is focused on rallying North Carolina Baptists to be a movement of churches on mission together. Todd was elected to the Executive Director Treasurer in May of 2021. And prior to leading the work of the state convention, Todd served on staff at the Summit Church in Raleigh-Durham from 2012 to 2021. He has also served as a director of missions in Florida and as a missionary in Central America. Todd earned his bachelor's degree from the Baptist Bible College in Florida and his Master of Divinity from Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. And prior to his salvation and his call to ministry, Todd worked as a sports reporter covering the nationally ranked University of Georgia football program. He's a native of Fairbanks, Virginia, outside of Washington, D.C., and he has been married to his wife, Ashley, since 2007, and they have 3 children. Man, I tell you what, you've got to be excited about what's coming up here in the next couple of months with college football getting ready to kick in.
Absolutely. As the recording of this podcast, it's 3 weeks and 5 days, but who's counting? In fact, I would say that bio is a little bit inaccurate, a little bit out of date. It's not just the nationally ranked Georgia Bulldogs, but the national champion Georgia Bulldogs.
Well, I don't want to make enemies, but I'll tell you right now, I'm not a big SEC fan.
Oh, okay. Well, that's all right. There's still room for you to jump on board. Okay.
maybe one day you convert me. I'm kind of a little dismayed right now because I'm hearing that the SEC is trying to root Florida State, Miami, and Clemson into the program and out of the ACC
and UNC. So wouldn't that be something?
Oh yeah, that would be something. That would be a major coup. I tell you what. So anyway, well, Todd, you know, when I met you several months ago, you shared your vision for missions and that encompassed several areas, basically. And one of that was that you wanted the state convention to be known as a movement of churches in mission together. Can you share a little bit about what you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that stems, Mike, from when a group of pastors asked me in the fall of 2020 to consider being a candidate for this role. That came from my wife and I just praying and seeking the Lord on the back porch, literally in the back deck I believe it was a nice September evening. We were just praying through, and it really comes from a fundamental belief that I get from God's inerrant, infallible, all-sufficient word that we are a movement, that God is on the move. And ever since Genesis 3, from that very first gospel proclamation, all the way through the book of Revelation, that God is on a rescue mission, and he's in a movement. We think of the famous Henry Blackaby line that he said, look where God is moving and go join him. And so we just, we really looked at this as we're a movement, and that's what we want to see. And part of the topic of this we'll get into a little bit. I believe that's key for the next generation. We're not just a movement, though. We're a movement of churches, and that's because I fundamentally believe that the church is God's plan A for reaching a lost and dying world with Christ. And we're a movement of churches that are on mission. And I really focus a lot on the fact that Baptists are not denomination. There isn't the Baptist denomination. We're actually a convention of independent autonomous churches, 4,200 of them, 3,000 participating here in North Carolina. And our goal is to be on mission, which means we're not going to be a good old boy network. We're not going to be a political action committee. Politics has its place and has importance, but we're going to be about the coming kingdom and not who is riding in on the wings of Air Force One, but on a Savior that one day is going to be riding in the clouds. And we're going to be a movement of churches that are on mission together. Mike, you want to talk about next generation, which I know you do. Jesus said that the primary way a lost and dying world would know that we are his is the way we love one another.
Amen.
And in the Garden of Gethsemane, the night before he died, he prayed for unity, that you and I would be one as he and the Father are one.
Absolutely.
And I think, I know that that's never been more important, is that evangelistic witness and oneness. So by God's grace, I've been in this job about a year, and we're very thankful. We see a lot of unity. We see a lot of passion, renewed vigor. And our churches are starting to really see that we're going to be a movement of churches on mission together.
Amen. That's one of the things that saddens my heart. I grew up in Baptist church and been in the Baptist church for all my life. And one of the things that really saddens me is the fact that so many of our churches has lost that vision of understanding what it means to be on mission. And I'm thankful to know that my church is very, very big about being on mission, being mission minded, and my church's motto or saying, or whatever you want to say, very much aligns and says we want to be a people of God's people who are in the business of transforming lives. And so, it's very important, for our churches to understand that. And I appreciate the desire and vision to encourage churches to be that way. That's super. I appreciate that, Todd. Well, let me ask you another question, because another thing that intrigued me about your vision that I've heard you talk is that you have for high school and college students as they're beginning to enter the world as young adults, to help them to engage and kind of to be the next generation on mission, so to speak, and to help them understand about that Great Commission and what it really means to be on mission. You had a unique concept that I thought was really intriguing, and I think it's something we really ought to pick up.
Well, I would love to share about that. Let me set the table a little bit, Mike, since we're having a conversation.
Sure. Go for
it. I think for your listeners, you are a very youthful man, but you're a baby boomer. And I'm that next generation down.
I'm on the low side of the baby boomers, okay?
Well, I'm on the low side, the young side of Gen X. I just turned 46 last week, born in the mid 70s, and but I'm clearly in that Gen X. You're in the baby boomer. That means we're in the kind of the older two categories when sociologists look at generations. And then we have the millennials who are next, and then we have Gen Z. And I think this is important for us to remember. When I turned 46 last week, somebody jokingly said, congratulations, Todd, in Baptist life, you only have 14 more years to be in the Young Pastor Network. And they were making a joke, that the way we as Baptists, we tend to think anybody under the age of 60 is young. But, when we look at Fortune 500 companies and we look at the workforce, it's much younger than what we see in a lot of our church concepts. And so I try to set that table for folks to realize this. The other part of this, I said this last night at a church I was speaking at, millennials aren't kids. Millennials turned 40 statistically. They turned 40 2 years ago.
Yeah, my kids are millennials. Both my kids are millennials, and they're in that area.
Right. And so they're having kids now. Generation Z started graduating college 2 years ago. And so my daughter is in Generation Z. She's on the young side of that, but she starts middle school a week from today. And what everyone tells me is, Todd, don't blink, and she's going to be gone. Well, missiologically, Mike, I look at that as don't blink, and she's going to be an adult. She's going to be who we're talking about in that part of engaging. And so I try to create that sense of urgency and say, you talk about bringing young people to your church. Young people are kids and teenagers. We're talking about millennials who are now turning 40. And looking at that, one of the things that this is one of the parts important of our vision statement as a convention is that we're a movement of churches on mission together. Is millennials, if you read most of the stats, they are the most cause-driven generation that we have in kind of recorded Western history. They want to be about things. They are the most mobile generation. They are the ones that grew up in a digital age where speaking and doing interviews like this or talking with friends overseas was actually just normal. They were incredibly mobile and still are in what they're doing. Generation Z shares some of that, but they're a much more cautious generation. Many of their formative years have been spent in political turmoil, where they're nervous about what to say and what not to say.
Right.
COVID-19 and the pandemic, obviously, for a lot of them, was a formidable time, whether that was in their 20s or teens. And so what we see is, while cause-driven, they're more cautious. Millennials, very cause-driven, but they share some of that that free nature that maybe a Gen X would have. And so the first thing that I talk about is for churches and leaders, and I love your topic with men making disciples, is that we have to understand our audience. We have to contextualize the message. The gospel truth and his word does not change, but how we deliver that has changed constantly for 2,000 years. It's no different, Mike, than when we train missionaries to go into other cultures. We are training them to contextualize and culturalize their material. And so the same thing needs to happen with the next generation. If you're going to be if you're a baby boomer or a Gen X and listening to this, one of the first things I can tell you, and I'm tempted to do this myself, don't look down on the generations that are younger.
Right.
It's so tempting. Just glance at Facebook nowadays and go look at boomers and Gen Xers who will dog out the next generation. These are people that are made in the image of God, and we are called to pour into them. I love what you say is that, retirement is great, but you're not retired from the movement of God. You're just getting started. And it's our mandate to pour into them. Also, if they lack certain things in the church, whose fault is that in the first place?
That's right.
Put ourselves in the mirror and say, that's baby boomers and Gen Xers need to look at that. So don't look down on the younger generation. If you want to reach the next generation, celebrate how God has wired them. And I tell you what, it doesn't matter if you're Christian or non-Christian. You can see with millennials, especially, and Gen Z are showing some of that. Man, they'll rally behind causes. Why do you think that they'll put up a GoFundMe page on Facebook and hit those goals like that? Is because they want to give money to something that they can tangibly sink their teeth in. They're the most likely to go volunteer at homeless shelters and those kind of things. Man, that is tailor-made for the mission of God. And they're also the most likely to go and take a job overseas to join a missionary team or something like that. And so they want to do their careers with something that matters. They saw the baby boomers as wanting that suburban life. And then they saw Gen Xers as very selfish and individualistic. And certainly there's some truth in both of those. They want to make a difference. And I think that could lead to the greatest outpouring of discipleship, which leads me to what you're asking about. And that is, we just believe that we can tap into the greatest missionary force that God has ever raised up. And what we're calling that is the Go 2 Years initiative. I believe this is what you kind of heard me allude talking about recently.
Exactly. Yeah. That is a fantastic vision, in my opinion. Go ahead.
Well, what we're talking about this is Go 2 Years is this. It's a movement where graduates and young professionals give 2 years to the mission of God, either at home on a church plant or overseas on a missionary team. Why do we say that? There's a number of reasons. One, we're looking sociologically speaking. You're seeing people graduate from a lot of the great universities we have here in North Carolina, UNC, NC State, Wake Forest, North Carolina Central. And we can put Duke in there too if we want to. But they're graduating from these institutions, and it's almost like they're willing to put their career on pause. Sometimes they'll call it a gap year. Or sometimes they'll say, well, I'm going to go work for a nonprofit for a couple of years before I figure out what I want to do. We say, let's tap into that. They're already thinking that way. The question is not whether they're going to do it. The question is, are they going to do it with us? Us meaning our Baptist churches and the great mission efforts that we have apart.
Mhm.
There's another part of this. If you look at the IMB, Paul Chitwood, friend of mine, would say that the majority, I have heard as many as 90% of career missionaries started off with a 2-year commitment. Famously, they call it the Journeyman Program. We know that statistically that most church planters and even some of our best pastors started off as like interns or strategically moved to be a part of a core team of another church plant. So what we said is this: you got to get a job somewhere. Why not the mission of God be the first and primary factor? And so what we are looking to do is to connect graduates and young professionals. And this may be somebody who graduated, took a job, the first job they could find back in their hometown. They're doing it for a year or two, and they're kind of like, there's got to be something more. We want to connect them as well. We want to send them to go be a part of a church plant. And what does that practically mean? That means that, Sean graduates from UNC with a degree in teaching. And instead of going back home and just teaching at his school and plugging back in, maybe he goes and gets a job in Detroit, Michigan. And by the way, he's going to teach at a school, an under-resourced school that's got, a high level of kids with single parents and maybe a lot of poverty. He can go and make a difference in that school, use his career. He doesn't have to leave his career for the mission of God. He can leverage it for the mission. Oh, and by the way, guess what meets in that school on a Sunday morning? The church plant that he can serve and volunteer at, or maybe serve on the worship team, or maybe he's leading a small group or whatever that might be. We want to connect a whole army of folks. My pastor jokingly called it the Mormonization of the Baptist Church. And what we mean by that, tongue in cheek, is that Mike, Mormons make up a fraction of evangelical Christians
Right.
In the United States, but there are 40,000 Mormon missionaries on the field right now. And that's because it's in their mandate. It's in their culture that they're going to give 2 years to what they call mission work. I say we make a whole new culture that every single graduate and young professional starts asking, what are you going to do for 2 years? What are you going to do for 2 years? And I believe that this could give an army to our church plants, give more support to our missionary teams, and start casting a vision that missions, church planting is not just the SEAL Team 6 of the Christian life, but it is the mandate of all believers.
Oh man, that is super. And I wish there had been a vision like this when I was coming out of college. I was going out of high school and college, because it could have changed the impact of how I looked at missions and changed the way I even progressed in my career of where I may have gone. And I know one of the things that you and I have talked about is if we can get this program, and I hate to call it a program, but this ministry concept off the ground, it could help our younger people to understand this is a calling upon your life, that this is the direction you need to go. And to help us, because I know we're always praying for God to send missionaries throughout the continent, throughout the world.
Yeah. If you look at it right today, standing here today, 15% of the pulpits in North Carolina are empty, and those churches cannot find a pastor. We're in a desperate need for pastors. But we've also seen in the past, my experience of this is how we did it at our local church when I was there. If we raise up 100 people who will who will do this initiative, and you're right, it's not a program. It's not it doesn't need funding. It's more of a mantra.
Right.
But if we get 100 people to go to, statistically speaking, we'll get about 10 of those 100 who at the end of 2 years will go to seminary to become pastors, or maybe who will sign up and say, I'm going to give my life to this mission work, or you know what, I'm going to join we look at this as a whole nother recruiting, a whole nother pool. And the other 90, I promise you, will be better church members because they've spent 2 years giving that what that is. And what we're not into, I'm not into raising up bored church members, but white hot followers of King Jesus.
Amen. I mean, yeah, I think that's super. And it kind of makes me jealous. I know I'm not supposed to be jealous. It's an emotion that I'm not supposed to have. It kind of makes me jealous about this go-to initiative and look at something that I may have missed out in my younger life. And I would encourage all the young people who are listening to this to really give this some serious consideration.
All right. Can I just let your your show know something that I haven't told anybody else yet. Okay.
That's up to you. That's up to you. Go for it.
All right. Well, just tell your listeners that they can be the very first prototype. My own staff will probably kill me on this, but I read an article not long ago in Forbes magazine, and the thesis of the article was the fact that retirees are living 20 years now in retirement.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, the article was about the burden that is on Social Security and health insurance and all of those kind of things. But I read it through a missiological lens, and I thought this. If retirees are living 20 years, why not tithe your retirement? Why not give 2 years, maybe your first 2 years, that you're a part of GoTo? Mm-hmm. And you say to yourself, you know what, I'm going to retire, but I'm going to give the first 2 years that my wife and I, or if you're married, or maybe you're a widow or whatever the case may be, I'm going to give 2 years to the mission of God, either with a church plant in the U.S. or overseas on a missionary team. I'll tell you why, Mike. I've never met, and I've worked with hundreds overseas and dozens, maybe 100 in the U.S. I've never met a church planting team or missionary team that didn't need the wisdom of a baby boomer generation on that team.
Amen. Amen.
And I look at this as, how can we expand GoTo to not only be graduates, young professionals, but retirees as well? And they're able to do it. They're still healthy. And here's a great thing. They still got another 18 years that they can sit on a rocking chair and play with grandkids. But what a great way to leverage the next generation. And so we haven't officially said that, but we're definitely we're definitely moving in that direction.
Well, good. That's good. I know that I have been invited to be at a men's conference in South Carolina first part of next year, and I asked them what they want me to talk about, and it's going to be mostly older generation that's going to be there, and they said, I want you to talk about when you retire, what they can do as far as being a retiree in church. And my biggest thing is the next question I'm going to really pose towards you, or the statement at least anyway, is the fact that one of the things you said that perked my ears up when you and I have talked earlier, and I've heard you speak, is the opportunity for the baby boomer generation and the Gen X generation, those of us who are retired or nearing retirement, to speak into the lives of these young adults. When I hear these men talk about I've retired, it's time for the younger generation to take over, I'm like, dude, you ain't got a clue. I mean, I understand what you're kind of saying, but they need you to speak into their lives to help them to move forward. And I think about Numbers 8. When you look at Numbers 8, you see where God's given the direction, the priest, the direction of the priest, that, at age 25, I believe it was, they began serving in the temple as priests, but age 50, they're retired. But the thing about it is, when you look at that 26th verse in Numbers 8, it doesn't tell them that they can just go off into the rocking chairs. It says now you're supposed to help that younger generation and help them to prepare and do the work, and basically train them to do what they're supposed to do. And so
that's exactly right.
So how do you think my generation, baby boomer generation, your generation, Gen X, how do you think we ought to do that? How can we get started doing that?
Yeah, I think one of the first things you just alluded to is we got to put them in. I hear it all the time. I hear churches talk about, well, we got to reach these kids. We got to reach these millennials. And I smile and I say, you guys missed that opportunity 20 years ago. They're not kids anymore.
That's right.
They're having children and they have mortgages and jobs now. And so we've got to understand that we need to have them in. We need to turn those reins over and realize that we need them. We don't need them to just come in and sit in our pews and do ministries the way we did them 30 years ago. I hear churches all the time say, hey, help me get some more young people in here. And I say, well, you got to be a church that young people want to come to.
Yeah.
And so how do you speak of the next generation? Is your worship service set up? How are you doing ministry? Next thing is if you have them, is allow them to lead. Let them stub their toes. I told a group of pastors recently, they said, why do you think we're all of a sudden seeing this mass exodus and empty pulpits? I said, because we had pulpits that were filled by people for a very long time and they never turned the reins over. Mm-hmm. And it's your heart is discipleship, Mike, and so is mine. That's discipleship.
Mm-hmm.
Start turning the pulpit over once a month to somebody and having them preach, even while you're still there. Then next year, make it twice a month. And the next year, 3 times a month. Let's start getting a pipeline, raising up people from within our churches. I hear people say, oh, the seminaries, they're not giving us any pastors. And I'm like, that's not their job. Their job is that your church will send people to seminary to be trained because they already got called to pastor from your local church. And so are we creating those opportunities to allow them to lead? There's another part is that we've got to be students of the culture to understand what is it. And I tell you, this is, Mike, I'm not good at this. I have to really work at this. But what is the next generation into? A constant leader is a constant learner. And if someone's not going to just retire and sit in the rocking chair, but still be in the game, they've got to constantly be learning. And they've got to be understanding what is it that the next generation is important to them. And so that they can take the wisdom that they have learned from a lifetime of ministry and they can apply the wisdom to what you got to let the next generation lead from their principles and their convictions and their cultural allure, if I can use it that way. What are the emphasis that they're facing in their challenges? The bottom line is what the next generation is facing and challenges in their lives is far different than what baby boomers or even mine, Gen X, faced as they were growing up. And so that's something that we really need to look at is not in my day, we did it this way, but in my day, here's what we learned when we did it. And I think that posture is a lot more helpful.
Amen. And, the other things I tell guys sometimes too, they ask me how I can do it. So go to your pastor, go to your youth minister, go to your college minister and tell them that you're making yourself available. If there's a young man that needs a mentor or wants a mentor under him, tell them you're available and offer yourself up to them to be able to speak into their lives and be there for them.
That's good. I love that.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And I know I've done that and I've had opportunities to have a couple of them to come under my wing, so to speak, and speak. And it's been a very rewarding time with me, not just for them. And, I don't want to really say it's been a rewarding time because they spend time with me, but for me, it's been a very rewarding time because they taught me things also that I probably didn't realize about their particular generation.
Yeah. I'm going to spend an hour and a half this afternoon in the hot heat and the August sun and dog days of summer, coaching football.
Oh, man.
I do that because, yes, I love the sport. But one of the greatest things, Mike, is honestly the impact that I can do into pouring into another generation. Being out there with them, it is simultaneously the most physically exhausting hour and a half of my day, but it will be the most rewarding. And I actually woke up this morning thinking about it, and I can't wait to give that opportunity. And I'll just tell you this. Here's a little nugget. When I served as a director of missions, AMS, I had lots of duties and things. And one of the things I told them was, I'm going to serve with the local high school football team. I'm going to serve as their chaplain and help them out in the coach's booth. So being out there with those guys. We've been gone from Florida for 11 years now, and I had 4 years with those guys, and pretty much a whole class. I still hear from those kids. I call them kids; they were kids then. I still hear from those football players who now, 11 years later or more, they have kids of their own now. They've gotten married, and the impact that is. I hear from them a lot more than I hear from the countless number of pastors that I work with as my full-time job.
Well, Todd, we've run out of time. I appreciate you being on the program today and sharing the importance of how the baby boomer and Gen X generations can share with the younger generations and how we can help impact the world by helping Generation Z, those that are graduating from college over the next several years, determine God's call on their life. And I appreciate you doing that, Todd. It's been very informative, and love to have you back on the air at some point. For those of you that has been listening, thank you for listening to Intentional Conversations with Mike Sandlin. Intentional Conversations is a production of Cape Fear Men, a men's ministry coalition. If you enjoy this program, I would ask you to do two things. One, share this program with a friend, and two, Consider helping us keep these broadcasts coming to you by becoming a financial partner to Cape Fear Men. You can give by going to capefearmen.net and click on the Give to Cape Fear Men button at the top of the page. Cape Fear Men is a 501c3 organization operating under Ministry Alliance, and all donations are tax deductible. Thank you in advance for your donations. To learn more about Cape Fear Men and how Cape Fear Men can help you reach the men of your local church, or if you just want to know more about what we do, go to capefearmen.net. And if you'd like to speak to me directly, email me at mike.sandlin@capefearmen.net. But for now, I will leave you with this blessing. I pray God will give you a rock to stand on, a brook to drink from, and a tree to shade you. This is Mike Sandlin saying God bless, and I hope you will join me again on the next Intentional Conversation with Mike Sandlin.